The two composers, Johannes Brahms and Richard Strauss, were very unique individual voices in a time that was incredibly turbulent and artistically, culturally was changing. Both Brahms and Strauss bucked the fashionable trends in music. Brahms ignored the music of the future, the idea that music needs a program. Strauss ignored a lot of the serialism, the Second Viennese School, a lot of the futuristic trends in music during his time, and they both really retained music at its roots, the idea of music that comes out of the Baroque and the classical style, and this romantic tonal voice. The Strauss happens to be a piece that comes at the end of the composer's life. The Brahms Symphony No. 1 is a piece that is starting Brahms's career as a mature composer. In 1948, Strauss, in his 80s, at the end of his life, created, in the style of Schubert, of Brahms, Robert Schumann, the idea of the song for singer, soprano, or baritone, and usually piano. This happened to be accompanied with orchestra. And these are four songs that essentially are depicting the end of someone's life, the end of a path heavily traveled, the end of a journey, possibly a transfiguration. And it's really cool because when Strauss was 20, this was 60 years before the last songs were written, he wrote Death and Transfiguration, which depicts a man at the end of his life. Fast forward to 1948, right before Strauss's death, after he wrote the four last songs, he said, "Death is exactly as I imagined it when I was 25," in Death and Transfiguration. And actually, in the last song, Im Abendrot, in the red of the evening, in twilight, Strauss, right before he says, "Is this death?" He quotes himself from 60 years ago in Death and Transfiguration. Lauren Sawyer is an incredible operatic soprano. She has an incredibly rich melodic voice. She's a local singer, so we're very fortunate and excited to have her making her Arapahoe Philharmonic debut. Brahms became the standard bearer of symphonic tradition, whether he wanted it or not. When he showed up on the Schumanns, Robert and Clara's doorstep in the 1850s as a teenager, when Schumann finally heard him play in his house, they were both blown away. He was a composer, pianist, but also a voracious writer and a music critic. So Schumann's voice carried a ton of weight in the Viennese musical circle. So Schumann saw Brahms as a 17 or 18-year-old kid and immediately proclaimed him the next Beethoven. People weren't writing symphonies after Beethoven's death in 1827. And there was essentially a dearth, a void for 20 or 30 years symphonically. So in the 1850s, he stumbles a little bit and he kind of spits out what starts out as a symphony. And he actually turns this piece in D minor into a piano concerto, which we are going to be performing at the end of the season. And he gets really self-conscious, really anxious, shows it to a couple people. They give him constructive feedback. He takes that as a message to stop what you're doing altogether. It wasn't until 25 years later, in 1875, and there was a gestation period of 20 years for this piece of music, that Brahms finally came out with the Symphony No. 1 in C minor. And it was, of course, received incredibly enthusiastically. The last movement even bared some semblance, the theme da-dee-da-dee-da-da, to Beethoven's Ode to Joy. But had Brahms not decided to take Beethoven's torch, symphonic music would have looked very different. Carl Nielsen, Gustav Mahler, Anton Bruckner, Tchaikovsky, all these great romantic composers that emerged symphonically in the 1870s and the 1880s, really I don't think would have done what they were able to do without Brahms lighting the way. So the First Symphony really represents, on many levels, overcoming that idea of, am I good enough? I'm not good enough, but I'm going to do it anyway. Even though it took Brahms 20 years to figure that out, what he did was well worth it for him and his and posterity.